Good morning, students. I'm Dr. Jacqueline Amral, and I'm going to present to you today process of communication. Let me start by telling you a little story. And the story goes like this. One evening, a man was frantically searching for something that he had lost. After about an hour, a helper comes along and asks him if he could be of help, and they both began to search for something that was missing. After about half an hour of both of them searching, the helper asked, "Sir, what have you really lost? And what are we looking for?" Then the man replied, "I am looking for a key, which is my house key, that I have lost." The helper then asked him, "Why didn't you tell me this before?" And the man replied, "You did not ask." Again, after searching for about a half an hour, the helper asked the man, "Where did you lose the key?" And the man replied, "I lost the key close to my home." So the helper asked him, "Then why are we searching for the key on a street?" And the man replied, "Because here we have more light and we can see clearly. Probably that's why we can find the key." Now, do you understand what's wrong with this entire act of communication? The first thing that was missing is the context, is clarity, and most importantly, they did not ask each other. That means they did not create a context to even start a conversation. That means communication deals with a certain process. And in order to understand that process, we need to ask pertinent questions in the very beginning when we want to strike a conversation. So I'll take you through this process. The overview of this presentation is that communication encompasses a broad range of competencies that go beyond just speaking or writing. For learners who wish to master this skill, which is also for academic excellence, then professional readiness is important, and also you need to grow personally. And this presentation covers these very aspects of communication. What are the core competencies? The first thing that we will be looking at is verbal communication. Now, as you saw in the little story that I narrated in the beginning, there was no clear articulation. Vocabulary, in other words, was not used. There was no logical organization in what they were doing and also saying. And obviously, it lacked persuasive skill. Then we will look at non-verbal communication also. What is it that contributes, or rather, what is it that contributes to the success of communication? Is it only verbal? Or is something very, very important, much more than verbal, that is needed? And that is non-verbal communication. Now, is non-verbal communication only about body language? Or is it something more? Yes, as you see subsequently, we have paraverbal communication. What is paraverbal? What is it about our tone, the pitch, the pace of our voice? And then we have written communication. Now, written communication is mentioned last because it is a skill that has to be perfected, because once you write something and the reader has read it, it's very difficult for you to retract your words. Let us start by defining communication. Communication is a systematic process in which people interact with and through symbols to create and interpret meaning. Now we know in the story again, which I will be referring to very often, Was there a system in which those two characters were operating? No. Were they able to interpret the silence? No. They had assumed that they were looking for something that is lost, and hopefully each other understood that they were looking for a key. Now, these were all assumptions. But what does communication say here? It says it is a systematic process, which means that communication, although it is ongoing and dynamic, which is called the process, it is also woven within a context. If there is no context, there can be no process. If there is no process, there is no content. Then everything in communication fails. And that's why it is important for us to understand the process of communication. There are 8 principles of communication. The first one is we cannot not communicate. What do we mean by this? Communication is inevitable. We are living organisms. We are living human beings. And in fact, if I might say, all living beings communicate, which means communication is inevitable. If you have a message, you have to convey it to your listener. Therefore, we are all the time communicating even when we are silent. The next one, communication is irreversible. That means whatever you say cannot be taken back. It cannot be erased. What is said is said. Next one, communication involves ethical choices. Yes, we are required to speak only those things for which there is evidence. If you do not have evidence for what you are speaking, then you are not making ethical choices. Next one is the fourth one, which says, people construct meanings in communication. That means meaning is not in the words you use or in the actions you use. Meaning lies in the way it is interpreted by the listener. Remember this. The words you use, the actions you might use when communicating is interpreted by the listener or the receiver, and he constructs meaning based on what you have said. Then, meta-communication affects meaning. So what is meta-communication? Meta-communication is communication about communication. That means there are many layers of meaning beyond the literal content. And I will explain this as we move forward because we are talking about the processes. Let's look at the next point. Communication develops and sustains relationships. Yes, as human beings, we build interpersonal relationships only when we communicate. The seventh one is, communication is not a panacea, meaning it is not a cure for every barrier. It is not a cure for every issue. If there is a cure, then you have to find it. But it doesn't lie in the act of communication itself. The next one is the 8th point. And as I said that there are 8 components to communication. The 8th one is communication effectiveness can be learned. That means communication skills can be developed, can be learned, can be practiced. And with that, we move on to the next slide. There are some statements which I have made here. And let us see whether these statements are true or not. Communication is always straightforward. Is it so? If communication was straightforward, we would not have misunderstandings. But we just saw in the previous slide that communication, the meaning of it, lies not with the speaker, but lies with the receiver. And if what I say is received straightforwardly, then we would not have miscommunication. We would not have communication breaking down. We would not have barriers, right? But communication is not always straightforward. Next one. Adults communicate better than children. Is that true? We say the child is the father of man because a child does not have any filters when he talks. He speaks his mind out. But adults become conditioned over a time that they fail to communicate better than children. So yes, children are better communicators, not because you know the language well and you're an adult that you can be considered a better communicator. The next one. A good communicator has the capacity to deceive better. This is a false nomer. No, just because you have a command in language, just because you have rich vocabulary, doesn't mean that now you are also adept at deceiving your receiver or your listener. A listener or a receiver is clever. He knows what he wants from the act of communication. Therefore, you cannot deceive him. That means you cannot tell a lie without being found out. Your body language gives you away. The next point, communication is always a conscious process. If it was a conscious process, my dear friends, we would all be making the correct statements. We would not have ambiguity. We would not use apologetic language like, I beg your pardon. What I meant was, let me clarify. No, I didn't mean to hurt you. We wouldn't have made all these statements in the act of communication if your communication was a conscious process. It is an unconscious process because sometimes we react to something that's happening around us. Someone says something and your immediate reaction is not a conscious thought. It is an unconscious one. Next, the ability to communicate is an exclusive capacity of human beings? No. Not only do human beings communicate, like I told you in the previous slides, that all living beings communicate. Animals communicate. Birds communicate. So it is not the capacity of only human beings. Yes, we are much more intelligent than they are. And that brings us to 3 points. We have interpersonal communication, we have intrapersonal communication, and we have extrapersonal communication. Now, interpersonal communication is where I am talking with another person or a group of persons. So I am building a rapport, I am building a communication bridge between the two parties because I want to establish a rapport, I want to establish an interpersonal relationship. Interpersonal, between two sets of people. What is intrapersonal? Intrapersonal communication is when I interact with myself, and we are doing it all the time. We negotiate with ourselves, we try to persuade ourselves, we think before we do any act of communication. That means we are communicating with ourselves, intrapersonal. When you introspect, when you self-talk, it is nothing but intrapersonal communication. And the next one is extrapersonal. Extrapersonal is something that is without yourself. It is something beyond yourself, okay, outside of yourself, which extends to animals and birds. Those of you who have pets, you would know how you communicate with them and how they respond to you. They too communicate back. They too have emotions. I'm also can go to an extent to say that even plants can communicate, because plants also respond to positive affirmations. They respond to negative affirmations. And there is, I think all of you understand the story which is circulating on WhatsApp, that there were a set of 2 pots, both rose plants in each of the pots, growing beautifully. They were both fertilized, both had enough water and sunlight. But a person comes and speaks to one pot, cursing it all day long, and to the other, it was speaking the language of love. And within a few weeks, you found that in spite of watering each of the plants adequately, in spite of putting them in the sunlight, in spite of giving them fertilizers, the plant that was spoken to with love grew better and bigger. But the plant that was cursed withered and died. That is the power of communication. Next one, communication can break down. Certainly, communication can break down. Because when 2 people are talking, there are bound to be barriers. If you don't understand the language right now that I am speaking, there is a barrier, a language barrier. If I use very high-sounding words or idiomatic expressions which you do not understand, there is a barrier. And if I do not set out to clarify my thought, then communication breaks down. If I see that the other party has misunderstood me, and I do not want to clarify that misunderstanding, then communication has broken down. Now, this is as far as language is concerned. But there are other barriers as well. There are psychological barriers, physical barriers. And about barriers, we will be talking in the subsequent lessons. But remember that so far, all these statements that I have made have turned out to be false, except for, can communication break down? Yes, it can. This is a true statement. Now, let's move on to the next one. Communication is universal. No, communication is not universal. Communication differs from one country to another country, from one culture to another culture. Even in India, we speak English right from the north to the south. But there is no universality in it. There is no commonality in what we speak, because it is determined by the cultures, the deep-rooted cultures in India, which comes from the other languages that we know. Your mother tongue, for instance, the way you have been brought up. So remember that communication is culture-specific. Therefore, it is not universal. It is not one shoe fits all sizes, right? Let's move on to the next one. Communication is as necessary for our survival as breathing? Yes. We, in the very beginning, saw among those 8 statements that one cannot not communicate. We are communicating even when we sleep. We are communicating the moment we wake up with other people. How do you communicate when you sleep? Probably you've gone to bed with a lot of stress, and they are all manifested in dreams. Like intrapersonal communication I spoke about. The same thing applies here. Human beings need communication for their survival, just like breathing. The next point, people express themselves better verbally than non-verbally. That is not a true statement. People do not express themselves better verbally, as we saw in the story. They both were searching for a lost key, but none of them knew where the key was lost. What key were they looking for? So were they able to express themselves verbally? No. Non-verbally, there was no non-verbal communication there except for both of them searching for something which was not even lost there. Now they say, and in the subsequent lessons I will be telling you, that only 7% of communication is verbal. The rest of it is non-verbal. Now you can understand by the statement if it is true or not. So in these statements that I have given you on your screen, you will see that only 2 statements are correct. The first one being communication can break down, and the second one, communication is as necessary for our survival as breathing. The rest are not true. Now, before we go to the process, it is very important rather, I should say, to understand the models of communication. Because without the models, you cannot chance upon the process. So there are 3 processes in communication. The linear process, the linear model. Okay? The linear model was first discovered by Aristotle, or proposed by Aristotle, in 350 BC. But the people who are credited for actually proposing this model in the modern way are Claude Shannon and Warren Weaver, way back in 1948. Now, what is the linear model? In the next slide, I will be telling you that. The next one is the interactive model. The very word interactive tells you that because it is interactive, it is a complete model, because it talks about a process where everybody is interacting and is involved in the process of communication. We will see whether that is true. And then the next one, the transactional model. Transactional model is proposed by Dean C. Barnland in the 1970s, and this particular model gives you the complete process of communication, as we will see in the elements or the components of the process. So here I put down all the 3 in a form of a diagram, and for you to understand better, let's look at it in one holistic view. A linear model of communication says that I have a message. I am the sender, I have a message. And you are the receiver. Now, because I have a message, I want to send it out to you. I want to tell you that you have to listen. So in the model, as I said, in the linear model, the message becomes very important. Not the receiver, not the sender. Okay, and in the process of this, there's a lot of noise. Maybe the noise is external. Maybe the noise is internal. Your emotions are playing a crucial role in changing the type of message that you want to give. And the receiver comes with his own set of filters. So he has his own emotions, his own physical disturbances. So this is not that the linear model is not always right in a face-to-face communication. Now, right now, what I am doing with all of you is a linear model. I am giving you a lecture. It is one-sided. I am not able to see you, but the way I explain myself to you makes me realize that probably you are understanding what I say, because I have a message and I'm conveying it to you. The next one is the interactive model. Now here, if you look at the diagram very clearly, it shows that the receiver, the message and the sender, all 3 are important. But most importantly here, one feature that has been added is feedback. And for any act of communication to have meaning and to have completeness is feedback. So here we have feedback. But there is still something missing in this interactive model, which is completed now in the transactional model. The transactional model says that yes, I have a sender, I have a message, I have a receiver. Encoding is done by the sender, decoding is done by the receiver. The noise and the channels are taken care of because I explained myself. But now what happens is the feedback is also there. What is the difference is that the feedback is not asked for, it is constantly happening. As I speak, I look at your face, I look at your smile, I look at your nod, I look at your shaking of the head, and all this tells me probably I have not communicated well or I have communicated adequately, and that gives you a complete model which is which says that communication is happening simultaneously. That is the transactional model for you. Then we have the process. Now it is very easy for you to understand the process of communication because we've gone through all the models, we've gone through all the statements that we made about communication. You see that? We have a sender, we have a message, we have a receiver, the linear. But here we have the feedback which is circular. So I do not have to ask you for feedback, it is happening constantly because I look at your face, I look at your expressions, I look at your gesture, I look at your posture. I mend my speech based on your reaction. I use and choose my words carefully because of your reaction. And that is the transactional model, which is the complete process of communication. Now, the channels of communication is again easy to understand if I list it out for you as to what are the channels. We have face-to-face, we have video conferencing, we have telecommunication, we have emails, we have handheld devices, we have blogs, we have written letters and memos, we have the written documents, and we have spreadsheets. And in the second column, if you see high, medium, and low, what does it say? Face-to-face and video conferencing and teleconversations happening all the time makes it a high information target. Emails and handheld devices and blogs are medium, which means we use it, but not as extensively as face-to-face. And then the written the written documents and spreadsheets are low because they are preferred for keepsake. You maintain records, so they are meant to be documented. They're not much used in everyday conversation. This happens at the end of a conversation. Now, here we have a very beautiful diagram which is self-explanatory because it tells you about the channels of communication actually happening in workplaces, and they are 4 in number. Let me not confuse you. They're just 4 in number. The first one is upward communication. Upward saying that people at the lower strata in an office can communicate with those who are their superiors, people who are at the higher rung of the ladder. Then you have downward communication. Downward, the arrow itself tells you downward, meaning it works from the superior level to the subordinate level. And then we have diagonal communication, where communication can flow in all directions. I need not consider myself to be a subordinate who cannot approach a superior. In diagonal communication, communication happens in all directions. A supervisor can go directly to the subordinate can go to the supervisor, okay? And then you have horizontal. In horizontal communication, I can talk to my fellow colleagues who are at the same strata in an office. And this is a diagram of a typical office where you have the CEO, the managers, the foremen, and the office. Now you look at the horizontal, I can communicate with anybody who was at the lowest rung of the ladder. At the same level, I can communicate, that is horizontal. When I talk about diagonal communication, the CEO can communicate with the workers, the manager can communicate with the CEO, the salesman can communicate with the sales officer, he in turn can communicate with the CEO. So here communication is happening in all directions. If I say that the manager only has to meet the CEO and nobody else, then again it becomes upward communication. If the CEO has to talk about policy matters, change of rules and regulations, then that is downward communication coming from him to the rest of us. Now this is a quote with which I am ending, and a very, very important quote indeed. This has come in the Times of India, a newspaper, which says, soft skills are both vital and very much within our control. That's why I suggest we rebrand them as power skills. Not just because attributes like leadership, creativity, collaboration, and problem solving are the driving forces behind each career, but also because they are within our power to change. That is the power of communication. That is the power of soft skills. And that is the power of what I have given you today in my presentation. So you have the power in your hands. Thank you all very much.